Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome to Then, of course, we must appreciate our panelists for accepting to be part of this webinar. And then we're going to be starting without much ado, go into the conversation for today right away. And then, like it was rightly outlined in the invitation that was sent out, this webinar is themed "Speaking Truth to Power: Challenges Facing Journalism and Music in Post-COVID-19 Democracies." So a very warm welcome to everyone, and on behalf of the leadership of the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy here at Nelson Mandela University, and also on behalf of the Department of Music here at Nelson Mandela University, I welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being part of this webinar. And as the conversation, as a presentation starts, please feel free to put in your question into the chat section. The chat section is just down there. If you just check, you'll see the chat section. Your comments, observation, contribution, please try to send that in. Thank you very much for being part of this webinar once again. And of course, we all know that it's no news. The lasting impact of COVID-19, it's actually no news. It's all over the place. We hear speeches from the presidents of nations. We hear all stakeholders give us different perspectives, and we are still in the mix of COVID-19 pandemic. And we thought it wise to come on board this morning via this webinar to look specifically at the impact of this pandemic from the perspective of journalism as a field. We all know the importance of journalism in democratic organization, and also we want to look at it from the perspective of music as a platform to express your voice, to voice out, as a platform to express what you stand for, your ideals in a democratic settings. And then without much ado, we want to hand over to our first speaker, Vuyo Mikeze. She's in the house. Thank you for joining us, Vuyo. Vuyo is a seasoned health journalist. She has, over the past 11 years, she has worked for some of the country's biggest daily and weekly newspaper titles. She was most recently the senior health writer at City Press newspaper, and she led the paper's coverage on COVID-19 and also the coverage on the vaccines that has been tried, the vaccines that has been coming up to help us mitigate the impact of this vaccine. So Vuyo, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you. And please, everyone, feel free to put in your questions and comments in the chat section. Vuyo, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the introduction and inviting me to speak during today's webinar. It is quite humbling and always daunting a task to speak at academic institutions, because truly the caliber of knowledge and insight is certainly exceptional. So I look forward to sharing my experience working as a journalist in this country during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also listening in and learning from the panel and the audience as well. So just going right into it, I don't think I even need to go into the tenets of what constitutes a democracy, as I'm sure there are more suitably qualified, people in this meeting to delve into that and reflect on that. But perhaps more crucially for me, I think, is just to reflect on the role of journalism in a democracy. And for me, my role, and the way I've always looked at my role as a journalist, is for my work to accurately reflect the lived reality of South Africans, and be a mirror and a voice to those who would not otherwise have it, and give them proximity to power and hold the powerful accountable. SA is quite lucky in that it is a country where journalists are able to do their jobs freely. They're able to challenge governments and opposition parties report and investigate corruption. And without investigative journalism, we know, for instance, that today we wouldn't know about how there are associates linked to the health minister, for instance, who are allegedly involved in looting of COVID-19 relief funds at massive proportions during a whole pandemic, which is mind-boggling. We also wouldn't know of the massive COVID-19 PPE tender corruption scandal involving the president's, or allegedly involving the president's former spokesperson and her late husband. And we wouldn't be able to question, certainly, the state on its less than glowing progress made on COVID-19 vaccination program, which initially was marred by not so proactive bilateral negotiations with pharma companies. Then there was the whole AstraZeneca vaccine debacle, whose rollout had to be halted on the eve it was meant to begin, as well as the current pace of vaccinations and which vaccines are coming online and when. So we wouldn't be able to question those things, as many countries, unfortunately, aren't. But let's dial it back a bit to the media landscape before the pandemic. So certainly the pandemic only exposed fault lines that were already firmly in existence before it reached our shores, particularly in the media space. For one thing, in the last 5 to 7 years already, newsrooms have been hit with mass retrenchments, shrunken workforces, and budget cuts as debilitating in impact, from impacting, the petrol in the company cars for journalists to travel to stories, to petty things, such as, limiting coffee and tea budgets in a newsroom. And just from my own experience, I started at the Star newsroom in Johannesburg in 2010, and there were at least 33 of us journalists. And when I left at the end of 2017, there was like 11 of us, if not a little bit under or over, if I remember correctly. And it's pretty much been the same for other newsrooms too. Most recently, I worked at Media 24 City Press. And last year, the stable closed down a number of its newspaper and magazine titles, which affected over 500 people. And looming closures and retrenchments are still cause of anxiety and stress in the workforce there today. So beyond the budget cuts, what has also had a detrimental effect on staff morale, I believe, has also been, the haphazard introduction of digital first models in traditional newsrooms, which has been fragmented and, just thrust on journalists without proper buy-in from the very people who are expected to now all of a sudden tweet from stories, take and upload pictures from stories, file short on-day files for online, and then again find an angle for the overnight edition. And we all know why this is happening, right? So many print titles, traditional print media titles, both national and international, are transitioning towards digital, but very few have done so or are doing so successfully. And obviously you have sites such as News 24, which have some of the largest online reader base in the country, which have been blossoming in the online space. However, there's been moves towards paywalls for stories, and that also brings in or created a layer of new challenges for online consumption of stories in how readers engage with those stories. So, obviously now traditional print media is moving online, but there's this challenge in maintaining the same quality of story for online as the readers were used to getting in print, and it's a challenge for many publications. And because of time constraints and the rush to print out and get the story out there first, publications are falling into such traps of just wanting to be the first to publish, which has caused a lot of casualty in terms of quality, quality in the stories that are being produced, both for online and for print. And owners will tell newsrooms that it's digital first, print best, and expect reporters, as I already alluded, to tweet, take pics, file from the story, get back to the newsroom, find another angle for the next day. So that's also presented its own challenges. So digital came in and, had its own shake up, but didn't really come in for many newsrooms with a lot of innovation, actually, or strategy in how we would be telling the news ahead of the curve in this new environment. With that, however, said, we do know that, audiences are willing, to pay for quality and to pay for quality journalism. And we see that with the rise of investigative news sites such as the Daily Maverick, which now is actually, which now even has a print edition when everyone else is moving away from print. Yeah, so, and then obviously came COVID. I had, just anecdotally, I had just been on maternity leave with my second child at the start of 2020. So I was due to come back to work in March, at the start of March. And that's when, already there were rumblings which had started reverberating around the country about this new virus that had been found in Wuhan. So I did return to work, and obviously we know not too long into March, we were then, hit with the news that the first person identified with COVID, was found in the country. And then what went on from there, it can only be described as a whirlwind in terms of newsrooms and journalism in general, I suppose. And I remember that day so clearly, shouting in the newsroom, it's here, as a press release, reached our emails confirming the first case. And I think, what ensued, whirlwind as it was, I don't think a lot of newsrooms were prepared for it. And indeed, the country, I don't think was prepared for it because, this was a novel virus. And, reporting on pandemics was something not everyone was used to. So then, immediate challenge. Firstly, the whole beat reporter thing had been done away with in a lot of newsrooms. So finding the right reporter who could grasp the issues to report and get an understanding of the science was an immediate challenge, because it could, once something confuses the reporter, it obviously will confuse the reader. So many journalists were rushing into headfirst into complex science territory for the first time. And then also temper that with the rise of fake news, clickbait stories, and headlines and conspiracy theories and conspiracy stories that were thriving, not only on social media, but even in family WhatsApp groups. Fake news was even outlawed as part of the state of disaster regulations. But here we were at some point dealing with, trying to debunk stories that were from voice notes, WhatsApp voice notes, spewing confusion, about lockdowns, I remember there was one with men in white gowns, and there was, this whole rumor that they were spreading the virus in township communities. So all this made for an even more hard environment to work in and to disseminate the news accurately of the situation. As with every story also came more pushback. And I don't know if it was a function of this new pandemic, but whether it was a story about, why children are not getting affected by COVID, the same way that adults were. You would get scientists, explaining those things in a story, and you'd reflect on the story. But more and more, people were getting so engaged, and you'd get emails on why this is wrong and why, research that reader had gone into and why the media, is trying to feed us lies and all of those things. And then obviously also the hard lockdown. It really affected our work as journalists. We were traditionally used to going into communities to get firsthand accounts from the vulnerable and in need. And, you know, now our movement and our physical interactions with story subjects were massively curtailed. But thankfully, I mean, even in the, you know, with this backdrop of all these challenges, we did have instances and very many opportunities of great journalism. We've had very good examples of good journalism during this pandemic. As mentioned before, you know, with now the latest on Digital Vibes, this shady contract, you know, allegedly linked to the minister, the COVID-19 relief fund looting, you know, corruption linked to leaders and all of that. All of that was exposed because of journalism. But also, obviously, we also need to reflect on where we did fall, you know, out of fall short. And that's where we had examples of sensationalism, inaccuracies, and regurgitating fake news as seen on social media. So we definitely have a lot of space to reflect on our role in a, you know, in this post-COVID-19 world that we've now found ourselves in. Thank you. Those are sort of my introductory remarks, and I'll leave it right there and I'll wait on the questions. Thank you.
Thank you once again. That was very insightful. Thank you. And it was just exactly at 10 minutes, so you really kept to time. Thank you so very much. Okay, so we are going to hear from Dr. Jolly Taba now. Dr. Jolly is currently a lecturer and head of the Journalism and Media Studies Department of the Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences. He has over 20 years experience in the media industry. Dr. Jolly has experience working with the national broadcaster, Television Malawi, for 10 years, and he has also worked as an independent producer and media consultant for also over 10 years. Dr. Jolly, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toby. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So Vio has already talked about so much about the role of journalism in a democracy, and I don't think I'll go so much into detail about that because that will mainly be a repetition of what she's actually said. But looking at the democratic environment between Malawi and South Africa, there isn't so much of a difference. Malawi, in terms of media landscape, is quite free. It's democratic. Media houses can write, can criticize government, can criticize the opposition, can criticize anyone without fear of repercussions. And I think there have also been so many scandals that have actually been unearthed because of the freer working environment in which journalists operate. So on a national scale, looking at the forest and not looking at the trees, Malawi media landscape is fairly free, where journalism can actually flourish. Now, getting back to COVID-19, I think the first case in Malawi was actually, official case was actually reported on the 2nd of April 2020. And even though Malawi never went through a national lockdown, but we also saw a lot of things coming to a standstill, and a lot of sectors, including the education, transport, private sector, the media itself, I think everything almost came to a standstill. Now, as already pointed out, I mean, journalism plays a very important watchdog role in our society. And most of the times, as noted by the first speaker as well, we really depend on actually going out there to get our stories so that at least we can actually give it back to society which we are serving. And unfortunately, COVID-19 came and disturbed that and brought in a new normal. And I will talk in terms of 4 areas that have actually been hard hit by COVID-19. First is the traditional media as we know it. I mean, I'm talking about Malawi's TV industry, radio industry, the print industry. I think they've all been hit hard by the way each and every country around the world has been hard. I mean, we've seen downsizing, retrenchments, layoffs, so on and so forth. But again, There is also another area that is very vibrant, and that is freelance journalism. And we're talking about, I'm actually including in that group citizen journalism, as well as those who are properly trained journalists but work on like freelancers. Maybe most of you are quite aware that Malawi has one of the highest cost of data per GB. Gigabyte of data, I think, cost close to $7. And Malawi is also one of the poorest countries in the world. At least it's very difficult for people to actually make ends meet, and at the same time, for you to actually be asking them to buy data at that cost is quite hard. So on the part of freelance journalists, I mean, COVID-19 has actually brought in a new normal in which they no longer have to like walk maybe to get kind of information somewhere, and they have to depend on data, which is already quite expensive. But even the people who are supposed to be listening to that particular reporting also have to depend on data. They have to buy data, which is already very, very, very expensive. So you will see that even the mode of a news gathering itself, I think it's actually changed, because in most cases, if, for example, you're looking for a story and then you find that that particular story, you can't get the source, whether it's on the phone or on the line, sorry, if you can actually go visit them, then you have to get them on the phone, or maybe if maybe you're using a Zoom or any of these platforms that allow interaction, you have to get data. Now, we've actually seen cases in which people have actually used excuses like, you cannot come to my office because we are working from home. And even though we have free access to information as provided by, I mean, by the Constitution, you will find that because of COVID-19, people have actually created some petty excuses like, no, you cannot come to my office to get information because I'm working online. And this is actually having an effect on how the information actually goes out there. But perhaps the most profound thing that I have direct interaction with is the fact that I am a journalism teacher. I am a lecturer at the formerly a college that was a constituent college of the University of Malawi, but now has actually changed. It's now the Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences, MUBAS. As a journalism teacher, our journalism curriculum at third year allows for students to go for internship. Now, we have very few established media houses that we rely on for our students to actually get hands-on experience, which is very requisite for, for our students, because we want, by the time the students are leaving our university, they should be ready to hit the ground running without actually having the hosting institution spending more on retraining them or reorienting them to fit the house style of a particular media house. But with the COVID-19, we've actually seen that already the staff from the traditional, I mean, our reliable media houses are downsizing. They are working in shifts. So even this year, to get placement for our student has been a huge problem, to the point that we've actually resorted to looking at other alternatives to ensure that at least our students still get a placement and still experience hands-on have hands-on practical experience before they can actually leave the college. And this, when you look at it in long term, has effects that are long lasting, because what kind of training are we giving them? What kind of practical experience are these journalists getting when they go out there? Because we've actually resorted to maybe sending the others to peer institutions, non-governmental organizations, in the hope that they will be able to find something that is related to journalism, so that at least they have some practical experiences before they can actually leave the corridors of our universities. And while this has been, while when we look at the impact of COVID, most of the times we look at it in terms of the negative side, but there's also a positive, because it has actually reawakened our way to start looking at our curriculum. What are we teaching our students? Because when you look at the journalism curriculum, more especially if we look at ours, it's actually preparing a student to be employed as a journalist by a media institution. But now, when you look at the opportunities that the pandemic has actually brought in, we've actually seen the flourishing of media influences using the social media. It does give us a chance to relook at our curriculum and look at an environment in which we're working, and ourselves the question: are we doing the right thing? Are we operating in the right environment? Or there is need to adjust our curriculum so that at least by the time the journalist is leaving the institution, they are not just being trained to be employed, but they can also become independent and still be a news media by themselves. I mean, a news medium by themselves. I mean, when you go on Facebook, when you go on Twitter, when you go on Instagram, they are influencers there who people believe more than the traditional media. So when something happens, they also go to check what that particular influencer has actually written or has talked about. What are we teaching in our journalism? How are we teaching our students to realize that maybe the traditional way of journalism is not the only way, because we are living in an era where I think artificial intelligence is now I think the thing. How are we incorporating those elements into our journalism training? And I think this is, if looked from a different angle, is an opportunity that does provide media educationists an opportunity to see and diversify and actually look at ways in which journalism can become innovative, so that at least when you're letting those students out to the to the actual field there, they are well prepared to actually tackle the challenges that are presented by the world. I think I will leave it at that for the moment, and then I'll wait for
Okay, thank you so much.
some more question time. Thank you.
Thanks for those insights and rich insights coming from Malawi. Thank you so much. Okay, our next speaker is going to be Dr. Kara Stacy. Kara is a South African musician and musicologist. She's a pianist and she plays Southern African musical bows. Kara has performed across Southern Africa, in the United Kingdom, Brazil, Peru, the United States, and Switzerland. She is the founder of the Betwixt concert series with cellist Nicola Detoy. She sits on the executive committee for the South African Society for Research in Music, and she's currently a senior lecturer in African music at Northwest University. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, to be talking about these things. I thought I would maybe, well, firstly, I should say I've been very sick, but not COVID. So hopefully everything I say is going to make some kind of sense. I thought I'd just talk a little bit about my work and then how the themes of this panel relate to the musical world around me. Obviously, my name's Kara Stacy. Thank you for the introduction. I guess I'll say something a little bit about my research as an introduction to kind of how I orientate myself within the academy and then also in my performance work. But I've been for a long time interested in indigenous Southern African instruments since training at UCT as an undergrad and learning with Dizu Plaatjes and a few other important indigenous instrument players, not only from Southern Africa. My research is mostly based in Eswatini, which is where I grew up, and looking at a particular kind of musical bow that you get in that country. In some ways, my work is quite traditional. It could be seen as a little bit old school in some ways, in that I'm working mostly with rural players, mostly elderly people who are really important musicians, but trying to reframe them as innovators, because the conversation about those types of musicians and artists is often very much rooted in older terminology about culture bearers and tradition, and not modernity and cosmopolitanism and that kind of thing. So I'm interested in innovation and these instruments, whether working with older musicians or younger musicians. And in that, though I am a pianist and a composer as well, I like to base my work on, or come to the work from a position of playing the instruments myself and learning from musicians, and understanding how, on a very practical level, how the music works and how people express themselves with these very special and important Southern African instruments. Yeah, so I'm interested in innovation. I'm interested in identity making and artistic expression, particularly with these types of musical bows. But then also that extends obviously to all sorts of other types of music that we get in Southern Africa. So being on this panel well, it made me think a little bit, because obviously I've been working since my PhD ended. I've been working as a musician, as a freelancing musician and a piano teacher to pay my bills. But within a few months of lockdown starting, I got, for the first time in my life, a full-time job. So immediately, as all the musicians around me essentially entered probably the hardest time of their professional lives, I was immediately saved from that. So what I'm saying today is mostly based on the people around me rather than myself, because I've really been like superbly lucky in this whole situation. Yeah, so in this way, my experience of the hardship of lockdown was like drastically reduced. But I wanted to say something about the role of musicians generally in society, especially when it comes to speaking, to engaging with political and social issues around them, but also and trying maybe not to glamorize that, because being a musician in Southern Africa is extremely difficult. It's a real hustle. And that means you don't always have the privilege of being able to make your music overtly political. Sometimes you can, it just completely depends. It's a very diverse environment. So in terms of music's political potential, things can become quite emotive quite quickly. But it's true that music has an extraordinary power to communicate, because in the simplest terms, humans give sound meaning. These associated meanings can be shared or not shared amongst groups of people with similar or different tastes, aesthetic preferences, politics, languages, and so on. It's in this way that music can hold power and can convey or hide social meaning. People can create music that's overtly subversive in more than just its lyrics. The more one listens and learns about music, the more it's possible to read additional meaning into the particular instrument selected for an arrangement, an unexpected chord progression, an angular melody placed over a homophonic backdrop, the disruption of any genre norm. These are all things that we learn about and we hear as we listen more and more deeply. And all of these can speak in some way. Also, that even before COVID hit, being a musician in South Africa and in Southern Africa, because obviously I'm kind of between Eswatini. I work in Mozambique a little bit as well, so that's kind of my track. Even before this time, being a musician was extraordinarily difficult. Though we've been lucky enough to have funding available for commissions and projects and tours. It's highly competitive. There's not enough of it to go around. I've often looked at our colleagues from Europe and North America and wondered at their ability to choose how to make music and what the function of their music should be. That in itself is a privilege that we don't always have here as musicians. Many musicians are hustling for gigs and teaching work, and realizing their highest artistic ambitions come second to feeding their families and keeping afloat. That's the first consideration here for me. That many musicians who were just about surviving financially before this COVID period, with a huge amount of resilience and hard work and hustling and, creating connections and bridges and applying for lots of things, whether they were speaking to truth to power or not, many of those musicians have been flung from any stability that they would have constructed over the years, sometimes over decades. I've heard many stories of extremely talented and resilient and productive individuals really struggling in terms of their mental health. And quite a few people, some of which I care about very much, falling into substance abuse during this time. it's been, it's really, really hard to, I think in many industries, people are experiencing this, but it's really been a super challenging time. Many people obviously have relied on teaching work, but obviously, anything in the arts is often the first thing to go when money is short. So, you'd be relieved that you would have a full range of piano students to fall back on to help you get through the harder months, but then parents can't afford to pay for lessons anymore. Many musicians have turned to alternative work, and I know many musicians who left music completely if they were able to. While some gigs have returned to the bigger cities, it's a small trickle compared to the vibrant and diverse ecosystem of live and recorded music that existed before this period. Beyond these day-to-day financial considerations, many Southern African musics, like many musics from across the whole continent, have successfully communicated stories from all corners of the country, all manners of trials and tribulations. Some have done this in short, cyclical, poetic forms above umhube harmonic layering, some by harnessing nostalgic sonics and jazz language of older artists or earlier moments of rupture in South Africa in particular. Some have created space for release on dance floors while singing about important or not so important issues that affect South Africans. In myriad ways, South African musicians speak about the hardships and incredible successes of life in our society. And I worry that this COVID period has actually silenced many of these voices. Wealthier musicians in larger areas may have been able to get some foreign relief funding or some paid online concert opportunities. They've obviously not been enough of these, though we are very grateful to have them. My concern is that if one didn't have easy access to HD cameras, videographers, a computer for application writing, data, which is a very, very crucial aspect in all of this, audio and video editing skills, friends and peers to help assemble projects or to help access venues or gear, it may not have been possible to make and disseminate one's own music. As a result, the circle of voices we're hearing from now as performers and composers has become much smaller. There's a risk that certain genres are represented over others, urban musicians over rural musicians, which of course is like a particular concern of mine. Unlike in wealthier countries to the north, South African musicians were already a hardy and resilient bunch. But like with many other professions and industries in our society, the increased economic hardship and lack of opportunity brought on by COVID-19 has most likely silenced some of the important but peripheral voices from this artistic space. Some of the fabric of our incredible musical diversity has been damaged, and I'm not entirely sure how we'll get this back, how those sounds and people can be brought back to play again. As I may have made clear from the start, I'm primarily interested in what artists working with indigenous instruments and forms have to say. COVID-19 has sadly minimized the opportunity for older, rurally based composers and performers to earn money from their music via festival gigs or funded collaborations. I've seen this most clearly with the ensemble that I work with in Eswatini called Bashai Bengoma, who've lost gigs, and in some cases, those opportunities were the only cash income they had. Even if it was quite sparse and spread out over a year. That group in particular is comprised of elderly musicians who play indigenous instruments and who sing, and some who dance, but they're also at greater risk of COVID-19 infection if collaborative opportunities do arise. These concerns about viability and opportunities are not only applicable to indigenous instrument players, but also niche experimental musicians, regular corporate gig performers trying to branch out, scored music composers unable to get ensembles to play their new works. So anyone who doesn't fit part of the kind of mainstream commercial appetite that we have as a society or as various societies when it comes to music. Many musicians have used this time to create if they can anyway. Many will make music now with a renewed focus on creating revenue to survive, and this may affect.
Yep. Can you begin to wrap up? You have like just 1 minute left. Yeah.
I'm not hearing you.
You have just like 1 minute left. You have just a minute left.
I can't hear you at all.
Oh wow.
I'm assuming you're telling me my time's running out. I just want to close with a few questions,
okay,
which maybe will help with our Q&A session, right? So of having a think about all of these things, I thought there were three things that I am worried about and three questions that I'm thinking about at the moment. Firstly, how do we ensure that musicians can support themselves and their families going forward? Secondly, how can we encourage the musicians that remain to continue to create the music that they want to make, communicating what they feel is important without an over-reliance on market forces and sellability? And thirdly, how do we support the rich diversity of musics and modes of expression, both commercial and not commercial, here in South Africa and Southern Africa, despite economic constraints? That's my final one.
Thank you very much for those insights and rich contribution. Thank you very much. And also just a quick reminder that you can please come up with comments, contributions, and yes, put that in the chat section, and we are going to get to that immediately. Our last speaker, immediately she makes her presentation. So please let's put in our comments into the chat section and also our questions. Our final speaker for today's webinar is Atia Khan. She is an arts journalist, archivist, record collector, and event curator. Since 2007, she has documented arts and culture, and she has been published in newspapers across South Africa. She won a generous fellowship for her master's studies at the University of Southern California. She is also the co-founder of the music collective Future Nostalgia, which hosts different gigs across Cape Town. Atia, are you there? Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you. Yeah, over to you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I don't have any paper prepared. I'm just talking from my own experience of working as a journalist in this time and actively within music and arts, I guess. And, you know, as you said, I started working about 2008 as a music and arts writer, and specifically covering everything, theater, film, but focusing on music. And I'm based in Cape Town, and Cape Town had a very, very thriving scene at the time that I moved here. I'm originally from Johannesburg. And there were so many music venues and there were so many gigs, and it was just a really beautiful, beautiful scene to be a part of and to cover. And but essentially, after I worked at the Cape Argus, or the Star, which is you know, it was a national daily basically, and essentially after 2 years I left and I went to do my master's abroad. When I came back, I found that the world of arts journalism and music journalism and arts writing and cultural writing had closed in so much that there were no jobs available. People who were in these positions. So I come back from the US with this master's and experience at a national daily thinking, oh, cool, I'm going to get a job. And actually, I spent 10 years. Like, when I think about it, I'm like shocked that I spent 10 years of my life freelancing. So writing for every single publication locally, a lot of publications abroad. And also in that time, learning how to DJ and forming this DJ collective, which was a side kind of passion. But what I wanted to say is that at some point, my work from journalism and all of this took a break, where I started touring with a Zimbabwean dancer and choreographer who was based in New York. Her name is Nora Chipamire, and I was doing DJ work in her performance. So I started being in performances between 2018, 2019, and 2020. And in March last year, we had like a tour organized overseas, and obviously all of that was canceled. And so all of a sudden, because traveling was not possible, all my work that normally would be work that would be paying was suddenly canceled. And another thing I used to do as a journalist was do the weekly theater and music gig guides for the Cape Argus. So it would mean knowing every single event that was happening in the Western Cape. And all of a sudden, that was something I did for 10 years. And all of a sudden, overnight, I got a WhatsApp one evening when lockdown happened to say like, I know you've been doing this for 10 years, but please, can you not send it anymore? And the crazy thing about that is that that had been a kind of a income for me, even when there was no freelance work. So if you think about it, how are arts journalists and writers meant to survive if the musicians themselves are not having a platform? Like each one has an effect. And because venues started closing down, because people started being so afraid to go out, um, there just wasn't anything at the time. Like there was a complete standstill. And in a sense, as much as bad as it got for me with regards to not having money, not having publications who want to publish work, not having anything going on to write about, um, it had to get really bad before it got better. And essentially, I had to dig myself out of a rut by using the skills that I have as a journalist. And after 3 months of completely freaking out in the way that Kara has expressed so clearly, I mean, Kara, I have a massive respect for you as a musician, but also as a thinker. And you've basically captured the struggle of an independent creative, which was not only me, but so many other young people around me who are incredibly talented, but just had zero options for income. And what do you do in that moment? So after some time of deep thinking, I started going back to the basics, which is pitching, approaching publications, starting from scratch. And, I was published I wrote a piece looking at the history of jazz and apartheid, and for publication in France called The Funambulist. And that was the piece that got me completely out of the stuck space that I was in. And then I started freelancing for Arts 24, which actually came out under lockdown. And I think that's very important to mention, that in a time when like print was doing so badly, a publication that is actually a really good publication online called Arts 24 started. So all of a sudden I was realizing that the pieces that I wrote didn't have to be about a gig happening now. It could, there's all kinds of art pieces you can write. And when things were completely closed, it was very hard to cover things. There was a massive distance between us as journalists or freelancers or whatever, and the people who were actually making the art, because they couldn't actually perform this art. Everything was online. So in the last year, there have been some incredible albums launched under lockdown. There have been amazing initiatives by musicians taking control of their own destinies and doing things themselves and not relying on anyone. But there was this connect. So anyways, after all of these months of writing and pushing, at the end of last year, after 10 years, again, of unemployment, I basically found a job at the New Frame, which is an online publication based in Johannesburg, and I am the arts and culture writer for them. So it's very strange, similar to kind of what Kara was saying, is that in this time that was so hard, but it was really difficult, but it was even more difficult for the musicians, who their art is like all they rely on, and also all the other artists around them. So theater as well. I mean, theater has suffered, something that relies purely on live performance. Theater has suffered deeply, and I did a big research piece for the Mail and Guardian, looking at the whole country and the effect of theater on the country. But what I wanted to just say is that, recently there's an incredible band from South Africa called the Blackjacks, and something very strange happened recently. Not only did they release a new album after so many years, but they were able to tour Cape Town, and I got to see them live. And during the performance, the guitarist, Mpumi Mtata, said to the crowd, which I wrote about this recently, but he said to the crowd, thank you for risking your lives to be here. And in that moment, as a limited amount of people in the room, and we all like listening to this great music, and it really like hit me what we were actually doing just to be in a performance, like how crazy it's become to just see musicians on stage and how much you value that performance so much more, and how much they value it to have a live audience, not a live stream situation. Because and also speaking to the topic directly, the Blackjacks, when the NAC protests were happening, there was a call for artists to show up and perform, and they performed at the NAC protest in Joburg. A track of theirs called Umzabalazo. So that's a video that exists on YouTube. It's beautiful. It really captures the energy of that moment. But I think that moment speaks directly to the topic of music being an outlet for raising awareness about something that speaks, that calls out our supposed democracy. So yeah, and just to say that what my initial conversations with musicians were, aside from the fact that they were struggling and I was struggling, so I was like, oh, I really feel for my brothers and sisters who are struggling even worse than I am. My initial conversations were just that all of them were like, we always knew that we were alone, and now we understand that we are alone. Like, there's nobody that's got our back in this country. There's nobody that's looking after us. There's no government that's going to save us, and we have to save ourselves. And so suddenly there was a push to kind of do your own things, do your own gigs, put out music on Bandcamp. I know a musician called Shane Cooper who created a whole album online and put it out just to make money on Bandcamp. So there were incredibly innovative things that were happening, but also artists just being like, listen, we don't have to rely on anybody. We can do this ourselves. We're going to do it ourselves. The difficulty, of course, comes in the fact that venues have closed down. When a venue is open, they can only take in 50% capacity, which means they can't pay the band fully. So how are you even going to get artists in the country to move across borders if it's not worth their time to perform in another city? So how does the music translate? And in South Africa, for me, in my experience, a lot of the times that I learn the music is by watching the bands live. And I also feel there's a part of my job not being done if I'm not watching the music. Like, I'm not an armchair activist, I'm not a digital guru. I have to be there in real life. And there's something very healing about seeing music live. So I'm not sure if these insights were helpful, but this is my 5 cents.
Thank you.
And as I'm nearly done, but as a DJ, I basically haven't performed.
You have just 1 minute.
Yeah,
just
no, I know.
It's fine. Wrap up. Yeah. Okay.
I got it. I'm wrapped up. Don't worry.
Okay.
But I haven't performed in a year, and that's fine, because I don't want to perform in a situation that's people are completely anxious to be in a venue, So I'm holding back until everybody's cool, and then we can organize events and stuff. Yeah.
Thank you very much for those. Thank you very much for the insights. Thank you, and to all our speakers, your insights are much appreciated. Thank you very much, and of course, across all the contributions we've had from our panelists, we can see very glaring is the insufficient economic support for journalism, and also for the arts sector. And then, if the economic support is not really there, then how do we expect these sectors to thrive, especially in this post-pandemic democracy? And if they can't strive, if they can't keep their heads above water, how then can they perform their democratic function? And yeah. Okay, we are going to, having listened to our panelists, we're going to go to the Q&A, the questions and answers that will be moderated by one of my colleagues at CANRAD, who is part of the research and engagement team. Simpiwe, over to you. Everyone, please go into the chat section and put in your question and comments there. Simpiwe, take it from here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Akinbade. Just give me a second to access the chat. There we go. So we'll start with the first question addressed to both Dr. Jolly and Vuyo. With the dwindling newspaper reading rates and poor reading rates in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of literacy, what responsibilities do journalists have to ensure that issues that are of national importance and are critical are accessible to those outside of the literate bracket? Is this even a consideration, or should it be? I'm not sure which one of you wants to take the question, to just take a stab at the question first.
Can I go ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll start with the last question, which says, is this even up for consideration? Yes, it is. Because maybe let me just begin to answer that by giving some statistics in terms of Malawi, which I'm so sure would be a reflection of most sub-Saharan African countries. And that is to say, according to a World Bank report, I think it was released in 2010, I think Africa has more mobile phones than they have toilets. And when you look at that, that's an opportunity there. Because what it means is the access to mobile phones. And I mean, we've actually seen a proliferation of cheap phones that are internet-based and they can be used. And I think maybe from a journalist trainer position, I think it's a high time that our universities start looking at this innovation to ensure that at least we don't leave people who cannot read or write, who cannot read and write behind. Because here is already a platform that transcends literacy. Because if, for example, we train our journalists to harness the power of the internet, to harness the power of a mobile phone, I think this would be a wonderful opportunity. There's a particular radio station here in Malawi, it's called Zodiac. They are already using SMSs to actually send them, but SMSs require somebody who can actually read and write. Why can't we start looking at options of also doing the same thing with maybe voice notes? Let's do some video notes. But all these need to have a very good foundation. And that foundation starts from our educational institutions. If people can actually start learning and being able to implement the power of the internet, to harness the power, it has a domino effect. So if, for example, I teach to students and they go out there, they be interacting with a number of other people who can also learn from that particular practice, and then even use that to inform people on very important national issues. So yes, I think this is an avenue that is worth exploring. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that response, Dr. Jolie.
So I'll jump in right there as well. You know, while I was at the City Press, obviously we had to very quickly change the way that you know, we did business. For everyone, you know, it was obviously business unusual. And it also coincided with the time that we were also moving a lot of our work onto the digital space. And funny enough, as Dr. Jolie was saying, you know, with the rise in people consuming news on mobile phones, I think I remember, you know, some interesting stats from, you know, our managing editor, Rode Marshall, you know, just telling us, you know, that page views from people accessing our stories online had gone up 38%. So people were actually engaging with our content, and more people were actually you know, reading our stories from online and from their mobile phones especially. And just on my side, in terms of the work I was doing and trying to also just, you know, going back to the traditional role of media as well, you know, just going back to being a messenger of the news. I think it was very important as COVID broke out, you know, to relay, you know, the information in a way that was understandable to people, you know, going back to just simple fact, you know, simple timelines, explaining concepts, you know, those things did a lot, you know, in terms of informing readers. And I'd get a lot of feedback from readers as well to say, thank you so much for you know, this timeline, it was what I was looking for, or, you know, thank you so much, you know, for explaining that or breaking that down. So I think that goes a long way also in just empowering the reader, empowering, you know, the way that they consume all this, you know, confusing and also just information overload that we get in terms of COVID and the pandemic itself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jolly and Vuyo, for those very insightful comments. Let me take the second question. The second question is asked by our very own Dr. Ronch. His question, or the preamble is, all of the speakers have touched on the notion of how economic hardships of the lockdowns have impacted the everyday lives of journalists and musicians. This has been exacerbated, of course, by the latest NAC scandal. Can the panelists speak to the potential pitfalls or opportunities that the digital spaces provide? Given that Dr. Jolly and Vuyo have taken some questions, let's flip the order a bit. We can start with Atia, if you are ready. We'll go with Atia, Dr. Kara, and then Vuyo and Dr. Jolly.
Okay. So this kind of, I think there's another question further down that was asked something similar, but look, on the one hand, as a journalist, a digital space means we don't have to keep fighting with newspapers to publish our work, right? Because there's space to publish it. And we don't have to worry that our pieces are going to get moved over because of ads and that kind of thing. However, it is very much this question of access. The reason that I loved working for a mainstream newspaper, even though I covered very independent content, is how many people were able to access it. I think accessibility is very important in terms of how much something costs, where is it found, and also the language that I'm using as a journalist to not isolate the people who are reading it. So make the language accessible considering our education rates and our literacy rates in South Africa. This is something that is, our figures, that this is something that has come up. So it is a responsibility as a journalist to make everything you do accessible. And oftentimes, digital doesn't always hold that. What it does hold for me, if I look at the new frame, which is where I'm at currently, I can write 2,000 word pieces. And because the new frame is Creative Commons, it means that anyone in the world from any publication can use the same piece. So the pieces have a way of circulating. So the Daily Maverick can pick up on my pieces, then it goes to a different audience, So that is something you cannot get in print. And I can definitely say that while I am a very old school person, I mean, I DJ with records, I love newspapers, I love things you can hold. I do think that the digital space means it goes a little bit further, even with performances. Yeah.
Yeah, just I think Atia's covered all the important stuff there. There's something, I think this relates to a couple of the questions that have come up, but I think the issues of access, I think there's an issue as well in terms of the limited amount of people who have enough data and have devices to access things online. There's a fatigue as well. And I noticed this I was lucky enough to be able to do a couple of online concerts during mostly last year. And, it's generally the music I make is not super mainstream anyway, so it's not like I was expecting huge numbers, but I noticed in my work and in the work of other musicians, there's a drop off. I think maybe they're little waves because now we're kind of coming up again, but people really crave being in this kind of sensory experience, this live music space, or at least I hope so, because I don't really know what music looks like without that being the kind of core listening experience for most people, right? So in some ways it's been amazing because even just as a musician and an academic, I've been able to access stuff that would have required me flying overseas to go, hear an amazing ensemble or, go to a conference that is prohibitively expensive. And that's myself as someone who has a full-time job and is able to, generally being able to apply for funding to do stuff. But I mean, if I just think about Eswatini and I think about the musicians that I work with there, the issue, some people don't even have cell phones. And everybody still craves artistic and human interaction. So it's really, I think there've been incredible innovations and people have really adapted in lots of ways, but I think that it's still, the access issues are crucial, and I think we're kind of bouncing back. I hope people are starting to think again about the stuff that Atiya is talking about, that these live experiences of listening to music, seeing musicians, seeing their humanity and their flaws and the kind of messy coming together of art in front of you, and then also I guess buying records and being able to like support musicians in other ways. So yeah, I hope some of that made sense.
It definitely did. Thank you, Dr. Kara. Vuyo, would you like to take the question as well?
Yeah, so in terms of opportunities in the digital space, as I had alluded to earlier, I mean, coming from a traditional print background, it's been a hard transition, in terms of getting your online, your print base, into online subscriptions. And we see a lot of pushback with readers, in terms of, wanting to pay for stories online. I don't know, there's a certain notion, I think, for people that, I don't know, if they can get it on Twitter, I mean, why should they be paying 75 Rand for a subscription, when they get the news online, or they see the news trending, the whole day. So, I mean, in terms of definitely getting work out there, I mean, I, as a journalist, sometimes I prefer my stories being online rather than, waiting for them to come out on the Sunday, because I mean, it's the space, you have the space to give your story some justice, and you have also, that immediate time factor as well. I mean, if something is breaking today, obviously, or if something is pressing today, obviously you have that as a resource to go on, you fall back on. But in terms of economically and the viability of online, that is definitely something that's still to be seen in this country. Yeah, it's a struggle. It's a struggle because there are so many competing things. This country, you look at the unemployment stats, obviously, being what they are, and then you also have so many people being, retrenched or just having so much job insecurity, and how then do newsrooms and publications make money, so online particularly, and having these online publications, as much as people want to consume things, is it really accessible, and is it really viable for them to pay 75 Rand a month? It's a toss for a lot of people between bread and literally reading the news, so it's a very difficult space to be in.
Thank you for that response, Dr. Vuyo. Dr. Jolie, would you like to also take a stab at the question?
I think Vuyo has actually put it rightly. I mean, for me, I don't want to repeat exactly what is. I mean, she's actually said, but the thing is, the situation is the same here, because it's a very difficult balancing act, more especially because we're already talking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on people's livelihood. I mean, we are concentrating so much on journalists, but there are other people as well in different fields who are actually feeling the pinch of COVID-19. They have to balance, the issue of paying school fees, the issue of putting food on the table, and then paying for a news that they're going to read on the internet when they can get that for free. So that's very profound. And while it does provide while the digital platform does provide opportunities, and there's so many opportunities, but they really need far more than just an opportunity. I mean, you need to have a financial muscle to actually harness it, so at least you can get something out. you really need the technical know-how, how to use it, how do you create content that is going to be attractive to somebody, that they would be able to say, okay, I'm going to spend my hard-earned kwaches or rands or whatever currency it is to pay for that digital content. So it's a very tricky situation, more especially in this part of Africa. um, let's see how it goes, because I'm so sure studies are still ongoing to really evaluate the impact that the COVID-19 has had on the media landscape and media consumption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jolly. Let's see what the next question is. Oh, so this is a question was initially posed to Dr. Kara, but it's been extended to the floor as a whole, right? So just a comment that was specific, not necessarily just specific to Dr. Kara, but it was just a comment on the work that she's doing, and how important it is considering the dearth of representation with regards to the kinds of artists she's working with. Now the question to the floor is, are there ways in which you each see media and music working in tandem to not only survive this precarious time, but to thrive within this new normal? Yes, so that is the question. I'll hand it to the floor. Whoever feels they want to take.
I can start us off here,
okay.
And at least I'm sure Atil will have more to say about this. But I think in some ways we're seeing that just exactly as Atil was talking about her work during this time. I think we're seeing a different kind of, or a shift in an ecosystem when it comes to music, and I can speak mostly for music, but music and also surviving and being promoted and being kind of disseminated and reflected on, and all of that, in a slightly different way to before. I want to think that like with so many parts of our lives, this COVID time has meant that overall in society, people are realizing, oh, I really like to go out and socialize, or I really liked, the things that we are not able to do and we haven't been able to do for this past year. I'm hoping there's a renewed enthusiasm for them, and an acknowledgement of how certain industries work and that they require support, as Vuyo was also saying, subscription things and paywalls, and I've definitely noticed a greater conversation around me about the importance of supporting journalists, for instance. I hope the same is happening for music, but I think that there is, I've just noticed, I think there's a greater importance put on radio, and digital dissemination also helps with that. And that's very much like supporting local musicians and kind of uplifting their work and talking about them, and as well as other African artists, I think. Of which Atia is a really important person when it comes to these things. So I think there is, maybe it's, I don't know, there's just such a huge amount of hardship. It's hard to spin anything as kind of positive at this point in time. But I think there are ways in which new paths are kind of emerging, and new kind of collaborations that are about not only the arts, but also reflecting on the arts and talking about them and critiquing them. And yeah, I guess we'll just have to see what happens.
Thank you, Dr. Kara.
I'm just gonna jump in very quickly. And honestly, I just believe that if we have not been learning from the introspection that we've received, like we've had the opportunity to do over the last year, with like no culture scene, no music, no gigs, no venues. All we have is the recorded music that we can listen to on our devices or whatever. Honestly, like for me, I can't tell you how much, when I was thinking last March, April, and May, and I had like my bank balance was in the minuses, I was like, but it's not just me that I care about, it's all the musicians around me who are actually incredibly talented and should not be treated this way. And my anger and frustration was to the powers that be for not looking after, for me, their national treasures. Because like, um, I don't agree with the thing of music and art being sidelined as like things of hobbies or things. I think they're like some of the most important things in our society. And as an arts journalist, I've always had to fight with editors about my work taking a backspace to like a story about politics or something. But like music is politics, music is everything. And for people who don't see how important it is into changing lives, into bringing communities together, like I don't really connect with that. So especially if you look at the role of jazz, all you have to do is just take a look at the role of jazz in the struggle of apartheid and the struggle for freedom in our history. If you don't consider that, and you think these things operate in separate worlds, and it's just people trying to do something for fun, like, you know, it's very strange. So for me, I also run a radio show once a month on a platform called Worldwide FM, which is run out of London. But I've been using that platform as a way to double up on the journalism. So it's not a radio show that just plays music back to back. Each show for the whole of the last 7 months has had an interview with a local artist or South African musician. And because it's not typical radio, it's online radio, it's a way to subvert the format of radio by, instead of using sound bites, it's actually giving that artist 1 hour. So I had Sisonke, I had the creators of the Indaba Is album, I had Tefo Mahola, I've just had the Blackjacks again, and giving them the space to talk from their own perspectives. The same thing with the articles, is giving them the space to actually talk about what is it that they've gone through to come to still, despite all the struggles. And what has really blown my mind in this time is the musicians, despite the lack of support, despite not knowing when they will be able to perform an album, they're still putting out and writing new music in this crazy time. But they did so also under apartheid, they did so, you know. So South Africans have an incredible level of resilience. And that's why we do what we do, right?
I think I'll add just in terms of the newsroom experience. You know, is there a way to you know, come out of this, you know, better? I don't know. I mean, you know, as I was saying, there's a bloodbath in newsrooms right now, and I don't know how media owners expect you know, quality journalism, or to even, you know, grow even in their online space that they're trying to carve out, if, you know, they're bludgeoning, you know, the very heart, you know, of what makes you know, the product that they're selling. So first of all, if they could just stop, you know, stop with the jobs bloodbath, you know, and capacitate newsrooms. I mean, it's as simple as, you know, the thing I loved about working, you know, as when I started working, you know, you truly had to fight for your story, you know, you had to fight for it to get into space, because there's so many, you know, so many people actually also just so great, and just having great stories and great ideas, and that, you know, and you know, you're always consistently inspired, you know, because you're working with amazing people, you're working with a lot of people. You also want to get your story out there, to get your byline out there. But now, you know, because of the, you know, the retrenchments, you know, the shrunken workforce, you know, to even, you know, to even continue, because and you know, as it's really hard to spin a good angle out of this. But I mean, if media owners really want to see, you know, their publications make it out of this, and the media industry as a whole make it out of this, they really need to invest and just get back to the basics, really get back to the basics.
Noted. Thank you for that response, Huyo. Dr. Jolie, do you have any remarks?
No, I think everything has been covered. It's been well covered.
Next question, just something you said, Huyo, sparked a question for me. What I found interesting in the last few years is, particularly in South Africa, there seems to be, in the higher education space, there seems to be a rolling back of journalism proper in terms of it being an offered program. So I mean, in terms of diplomas in journalism and actual degrees in journalism, but what you're finding is more of a push towards more media and communications type of qualifications, where you would find that journalism is one of the subjects, but there is the figure of the journalist seems to be falling away, and what we're finding they're trying to create is this all-encompassing type of content creator, right? Where the demand now is not only to make pretty with words or present very captivating concepts, but now you also have to be a whiz at capturing videography and capturing those images. So my question, I guess, particularly to those within the journalism industry, is what ramifications do you guys see this having on the particular industry? Yes.
I think Dr. Jolly go for this one.
Okay, yeah. Let me just try to attempt to answer that one. What you're observing is very true, and there's always been a battle between the understanding of what journalism is and what media studies are. So, because when we go back into the basics, I think journalism will always be there, because normally journalism teaches you how to. And I think maybe in the same vein, I think I will go back to a question that I've actually seen in the text, in which somebody actually is asking if, let me just go back to, is asking to say, to Vuyo and Joy, the so-called citizen journalism fulfill the democratic, can so-called citizen journalism fulfill the democratic role of the media given the lack of resources and limited capacity for fact-checking when working as an individual outside of media institutions? So let me just maybe, in an attempt to answer the question that you've just posed now, also answer that particular question. I think it's unfortunate when we start like taking, sidelining the role of journalism because we're introducing different specialized fields, because journalism will always be there, because journalism teaches you the basics of covering news, because covering news is a special trait that somebody has to have the very basics to understand what is news. Yes, news is very subjective, because what is news to me may not be news to somebody else. But having the essence of journalism in each and every particular field that has to deal with communication is very important. And I still feel that, I think what is actually happening, more especially with the advent of the digital platform, is an issue of specialization. So you will find that maybe at first they were offering a general journalism degree in which somebody takes journalism from first year to fourth year. These days you find maybe you're going to take it for 2 years, and by the time you're getting into your third year or your fourth year, you are now specializing. That's not all bad, because when you look at the platforms that are available in journalism, you have print, TV, radio, and now internet-based platforms. They are very few people who can be very good in all these mediums, but they are specializations. But I still feel it's very important to have still trained journalists as journalists, and then maybe after practicing, they can go into their specialized particular field. Now, when it comes to citizen journalism, it's a double-edged sword, because journalism does provide a particular space in which somebody can actually thrive without the bureaucracy and the gatekeeping principles that we find in traditional and institutionalized media houses. But at the same time, that too has its own benefits, because before you can actually send that particular message, or especially dealing with citizen journalism, you're talking about the gatekeeping process. The gatekeeping process has a particular role to play in journalism. And this is the reason why you find, when you look at a lot of studies that have been carried out, people would rather believe radio, TV, and print, because they know that news went through a particular process which actually allowed the news, the particular information that is being taken to the public to be verified before it can actually be put in the public domain. But at the same time, it also presents like obstacles to the free flow of information, because some can still use the same principles that are used to protect news to use it for their own personal benefit. So it's still a debate that is ongoing, and I'm so sure that the answers are not going to be fine now. But if I was given a choice, I think I would go with a free media in which citizen journalism is part of. But maybe coming from an education background, a journalism background, maybe it's a high time we start teaching journalism 101 to the younger classes, secondary schools, primary schools. People just have to know the basics. I mean, if, for example, you take something, do you just have to put it there out for somebody just to decide whether it's true or not? Or do you have to go through some basic principles that will actually cross-check whether the information you're putting out there is harmful or not? I think let me just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jolly. I've been informed that we need to wrap the Q&A. So I think I'll just hand it to the floor for some short concluding remarks from the speakers. Thank you very much for such a productive session.
Thank you.
Oh, there's no particular order. Just, I'm sorry. Whoever feels compelled can begin with their concluding remarks, and then we will hand over for the closing.
I think maybe let me just say thank you so much for organizing such an event. It's a high time Africa needs to get together, so at least we can actually share experience. And I hope this is just the beginning. There are so many other areas in which we could actually have this the same platform to talk about different issues that affect the media landscape as it relates to other particular fields. So thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this great event. Thank you.
I'll just add to that and add my thanks, and also just say I think there's just an ongoing conversation that needs to happen. I think for me, hearing everybody talk and hearing about the issues, there's so many similar issues, and I'm sure that will be shared with a lot of other industries and artistic fields as well. But yeah, thanks for organizing it.
Yes, just to also echo my thanks, and to also just go back a bit to the citizen journalism question. When I was at the Star, just very briefly, when I was at the Star, we used a lot of content from Health E-News, and which is basically, a journalistic service that sort of gives wire content to publications, and it was mostly from citizen journalists, it was often the backbone of our health page sometimes when my stories weren't coming through for that day. So definitely very, very important. They have a very crucial role to play, and I echo every single thing Dr. Jolly was saying. And also just to also say, it's really now time that after this whole whirlwind of reporting and changing the way we work in this pandemic, now is really truly the time where we use this time to reflect as well, and to have such conversations on how it's impacted our work and how and the avenues that we need to change. So truly looking forward to more discussions such as these. This is only like really touching the surface of many, many issues that are shared in the arts as well as in the media.
Yeah, just want to say thank you for having me, and looking forward to continuing this in the future in real life.
Dr. Mark, for the vote of thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much to everybody who joined us. I think we've really shown how important these cross-disciplinary and inter-practiced kinds of discussions are. And these conversations have certainly given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure that all of our all of the people who have tuned in various ways in various digital platforms have a lot to think about as well. On behalf of the research program of the Center of the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, as well as the music department at Nelson Mandela University, I would like to extend a wonderful vote of thanks to our 4 speakers for providing us with such fascinating insights from their own perspectives, and which speak to broader questions that we are all sort of grappling with in these very, very difficult and very different times. So a very, very big thank you to them, and a thank you to everybody who has joined us across the platforms and for contributing to questions. We look forward to further engagements, and as has been said, hopefully further engagements in person. So a very big thank you from all of us.
Thank you, everyone. If you can just switch on your cameras to say virtual bye-bye, and that'll be all for now. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thanks for being part of today's
Everybody.
webinar.
Bye, everybody.